1 in 4 women in Australia have been through period poverty. Period poverty means when you're unable to afford period products or you're making a tampon be in for 6 to 8 hours because you want to make the box last longer. We've all done that, right?
You're listening to Becoming MatchFit, the podcast helping athletes and high performers build confidence, clarity, and opportunity on and off the field. I'm your host, Nick Greentree. Welcome back to Becoming MatchFit. Today's conversation is one that I think every club, coach, parent, and athlete needs to hear. We are joined by Rochelle Courtenay, the founder of Share the Dignity and the driving force behind Bloody Good Sport initiative, which helps keep girls in sport by removing one of the most overlooked barriers, period poverty. Welcome, Rochelle. It's so great to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm excited for a chat.
Fantastic. Now, you are doing incredible work. Can you tell us a little bit about what drove you to create Share the Dignity?
Yeah, in 2015, I read an article that talked about the fact that women were experiencing homelessness in Australia. And at that stage, it said 48,000 women didn't have somewhere safe to call home. But what I read next changed me and changed Australia forever, is that they were using socks and newspaper to deal with their period. Now, I had never thought that was ever a thing. I'd suffered severely with endometriosis. So for me, a period was not just a period. And I would be surprised that if I didn't suffer so badly with endometriosis, Share the Dignity probably wouldn't be here, right? For me, being able to have access to period products, a washing machine, endless amounts of underwear, a shower, hot water bottle, chocolate, all of those things were so important to a period. So for me to think that somebody just didn't even have period products was mind blowing. So at that stage, I had my own personal training business. They were just women trying to be the best versions of themselves in their health and fitness journey. And so I asked them all to bring me a packet of pads or tampons for every wine they had in the month of March 2015. Some of my ladies would just bring me a bag and say, let's not count them, babe. Let's just start training. And so it was that started it. Like, I don't believe that there is a woman in Australia who wouldn't give a pad or a tampon to somebody in a bathroom. It's a girl code, right? We've all been there. But how could I amplify that? How could I make sure that people knew that this was a problem? Because there isn't one of us who would ever turn our head away from that. And so that's really how Share the Dignity started. We collected 450 packets of period products. We gave them out to 5 local charities, but it wasn't like we were giving a woman a warm jacket or a pair of shoes. It was a monthly problem. And periods don't stop because you're experiencing homelessness or you've fled domestic violence or you're living one paycheck to another, because to be honest, 173,000 women turned to homelessness services just last year. That does not include our drought-stricken farming communities, our remote Indigenous communities. 3 million plus families that live one paycheck to another, and women who are choosing to put food on the table as opposed to buying period products. The problem is so much greater than I ever first imagined. But you know what? It was naive to think that I could fix the problem immediately, but I think that naivety helped me not be so struck by the enormity of the problem.
Amazing. Those are really scary numbers, to be honest. And like you say, when you start to really delve into it and uncover what is really going on, it is way scarier than you think.
So in March and August, our collection boxes go out in every Woolworths supermarket, but also in about another 1,000 organizations, from politicians' offices to hairdressing salons to other businesses that come on board to help us to share the dignity. So making sure that people come on board and use their voice to ensure that people know the problem exists, because buying a packet of period products and donating them will help us pass them on to charities in need. So whether the products are donated in Broome, Bendigo, Brighton, Ballarat, they stay in that local area. We have 6,000 volunteers in Australia. They are the backbone to Share the Dignity. So making sure that where they're donated local, they also stay local. We've now collected nearly 6 million packets of period products that have been distributed. So while I would love to think 6 million period products, and it's such an enormous number, what we're aiming for is menstrual equity in Australia. So
Did you think that you could have this much impact on this problem?
menstrual equity to me means that there is provision of period products wherever you need them. So back in 2016, I came up with the world's first Dignity vending machine. It is a vending machine that dispenses at the touch of a button bespoke packet of period products that are in a bathroom. So you don't have to ask anybody. You just can deal with your period with dignity. We now have 1,500 of those machines installed in homelessness hubs, domestic violence services, schools, and so forth. It is about menstrual equity. So how to get people get provision of period products, but how do we educate accordingly men, women, boys and girls around menstruation? Because unless we educate, we also can't remove the shame and stigma.
Like you say, the naivety probably led you to that. But now that you are well in the thick of it and discovering what you do through the data that you collate, how's that looking in terms of impact for you?
So menstrual equity for me is the golden prize. It's the ticket that I want at the end, right? So while we'll still keep collecting, my goal is very focused on that last goal that's going through the hoop. I played netball for 50 years of my life. Everything comes back to a netball analogy. So I'm looking for that golden ball to go through that hoop by 2031. And it's done for me in incremental measurements of our bloody big survey data.
Fantastic. I love that you have that focused goal, that there is an end that you're driving towards, because I think it's right. This will keep perpetuating if we don't have that end goal. So tell me a little bit about what that data is capturing and what are you learning from it?
Yeah, so the bloody big survey data, in 2021, we did a campaign with Facebook because what I wanted was, how do we remove the shame and stigma? And it's so great to hear we were having a chat about your 12-year-old daughter and her friends just discussing periods. That's what we wanted. We wanted to, and I really took the look at um, love and how 20 years ago you weren't allowed to love anybody publicly, whoever you wanted. So you didn't have same-sex marriage. You had people being shameful of the people that they love. And so I thought, how do we do the same with periods? How do we make people just be proud of the fact that they're menstruating or that they love somebody who menstruates? But we had to allow a voice to that. So in 2021, we had this campaign called Period Pride, and we exhibited 4 different stories. One was Oscar, a transgender, talking about what does periods mean to him. We had a young girl who was 21 with her dad talking about getting her period in her formal and her dad having to rescue her and change and helping her clean out the 4 layers of blue taffeta on her dress. An Indigenous woman. And then just what does that mean? How can we share those stories publicly so that people will just have conversations about menstruation? But in there was also this fact that I was trying to get the data from our vending machines that were being installed in hospitals and in schools and so forth. And what I wanted was to find out, were the vending machines that we were putting in schools reducing the absenteeism from girls? Was it also removing the shame and stigma? And was it creating more positivity? Well, I couldn't do it. It was really hard because everything was just shrouded in ethics, and trying to get data from young girls in schools was so hard. So what I did was use the questions that were done through the universities and just made my own survey. We ended up with 120,000 responses and 23,000 responses, the biggest body of data the world had ever seen on menstruation. The data was alarming. 1 in 4 women in Australia have been through period poverty. Period poverty means when you're unable to afford period products, or you're making a tampon be in for 6 to 8 hours because you want to make the box last longer. We've all done that, right? What we did with that 2021 survey of data was advocate to every federal government, state government about providing period products in schools. So, which was great. We now have in Australia where provision of period products is in most primary and secondary schools. Big wins, right?
Yeah.
A girl should never miss a day of education because her family can't afford period products. What we wanted to do when we did it in 2024 was look to the base of questions and keep them the same so that we could measure the impact. In saying that, there were some things that we really wanted to add in 2024. We wanted to know what your postcode was, because in the first survey, we just asked them what state they lived in. And so we wanted you to go back to every council and say, this is what menstrual inequality looks like in your region. And when we do it again, what are the measures that you're going to put in place with us to be able to make that better? We also asked people for what was their household income, because we were hearing, I was going to law firms and speaking in offices, and women would come up and tell me a secret about how, she was cutting her pad in half or she was leaving her tampon in, and they were earning $100,000 a year.
Wow.
But their family household expenses were so high that
Mm.
the women were still cutting a pad in half, using wadded up toilet paper. And I wanted to show through the data that every workplace should be providing period products, not because you pay them well, we get that, but sometimes at points in women's lives, and I look at the Bloody Big Survey and I look at perimenopause, you can go through 20 pads a day when you're in perimenopause. What would you want as a boss to be making sure that your staff are not worrying about that? We got pool tables and coffee machines and yoga classes in workplaces. We're saying, how can you just provide period products in your workplace to stop this anxiety of what needs to happen? Anyway, so 2024, we also had a really interesting conversation with Harvey Norman and how involved they were in sports. And one of the questions were, well, have you captured the data about sport? And we're like, no, embarrassing, not thought about it. So we included that sports question in there, which then when it came back and it said that 64% of girls were not participating in sport because of their period, and the most reason was a fear of leaking, we were like, oh my God, we have bloody good sport. So we're asking every sporting code to come on board to ensure that no girl misses out on sport because of her period and the lack of access to it. So within Bloody Good Sport, we are looking at how does sporting code provide period products? How to make sure that the uniform is adequate for girls who would be menstruating? How do we make sure that the coaches are adequately educated and that there is sanitary bins wherever you are training or playing sport? So from that realm, and why we're talking today is about bloody good sport, but we've also got building bloody change. And how do we make sure that there isn't a workplace in Australia that also doesn't have the provision of period products and embarrassingly sanitary bins, right? But also, what does menopause and period leave look like? How do we make sure that every workplace has education around menstruation? And all of the people that we've had to work with, we've had a Fair Work Australia change their code of conduct, which is that it would be beneficial for a workplace to provide period products, where by 2031, we want a must. It must be provided that you provide period products and sanitary bins in every workplace. So
Yeah.
all of those things are heading towards 2031. So when I'm sitting down looking at working out our questions for 2027 in the Bloody Big Survey, what we're looking for is better incremental changes in those numbers through the programs that all of us are doing, from a federal to a state to a council to a sporting code to a workplaces. How do we all play a role in menstrual equity so that your daughter, who's 12, never has to live through this?
Incredible. It sounds like you are really tackling it very strategically and doing it in a very conscious way, which I think is amazing. So congratulations to everybody that you have working with you. In talking about the sport element, I was chatting with my daughter this morning, and one of her favorite movies is Blended with Adam Sandler. She's a huge fan. And it reminded me of Adam Sandler, a character, has three daughters. He's a single dad and he's a sports coach. And he really loves his daughters, but he treats them like boys because he just doesn't know any different. And it sort of made me think about this lens of the sporting community. And we have a lot of male coaches. Yes, females are playing more and more sport, and that's fantastic. But it's the education element that you spoke about there around, it isn't just a female problem. Yes, we're the ones that are menstruating, but we really should be having those open conversations, whether it's in the family unit or whether it's in a team situation. What would you like to see happening in the sporting environment so that we can support girls, keep them playing?
Yeah. Look, I think in our Bloody Big Survey, 53% of women said they didn't feel like they were adequately educated on menstruation. Imagine 53% of people coming out of school and saying, oh, I didn't really get maths. I didn't really get English. 53% is an epidemic failure in our education system, right? So whilst we could look at, yes, this conversation needs to take place at home. I get that. But body anatomy is taught in phys ed, it's taught in school. Why is it falling through the cracks? Why is there not enough education? And why are boys still omitted from the classroom when these conversations happen? Now, if you don't get your period, you come from somebody who did. And it affects every single one of us. There isn't a person in this world who is not affected by a period, because you love your mum or you love your sister or you've got colleagues at work or you're married to your wife. It's about how do we make sure that education is afforded to everybody. And the reason that Adam Sandler, for example, he just didn't know any better. And he would have been ashamed that he didn't have the answers, so that men just make jokes about it because they just don't know. And they feel embarrassed that they weren't given the education that they should have been given. On our website, you will find every education component that you need as a man or as a woman, right? So we worked with the NRL. Now, there was a 30% increase in girls' participation in rugby league, which is fabulous. It is so good to see women playing AFL, rugby league, cricket, all of those sorts of things. But how do we make sure that Ruby's dad, who's put his hand up to coach the under 14s team, has got the information that he needs to have? So we worked with the NRL to, what does a coach need to know? It's a one-pager. We don't need them to go into great detail, but they do need to know the very basics. And what we're asking for sporting codes is to put period products in the training bag. They don't need to be hidden. They just need to be there. In 5 years' time, with girls having provision of period products at schools, at universities, and in workplaces, it won't be a joke anymore, right? It'll just be, oh my God, how cool is that? Or I can run off at halftime, grab a period product the same as I can grab a cut up orange, right? And go to the toilet and change my pad if I need to. I played netball from the time I was 8 till the time I was 50. Now, I suffered severely with endometriosis. So for me to play a game of netball, I would have to have changed my tampon. I had to wear a pad and I would run off at halftime. I always had 2 tampons in each side of my bra, right? I'd run off and I'd come back on because the fear of leaking was so, it created an anxiety for me that should never have been there, right? Throughout my life, would have had about 9 surgeries. I never once told a netball coach or a netball team player or my workplace that I was having endometriosis surgery. I reckon I had my appendix out 6 times and gallstones and all of those other things that just threw people off the fact that I was having endometriosis surgery, right? How do we break down all of those conversations? How do we make sure that men have an understanding, even that 1 in 8 in his team would have endometriosis, and how do they need to be treated differently when they're on their period? How do we just give them the right information so that no girl drops out of participating in sport or misses 1 week out of every 4, right? Playing sport, and you know this more than anybody, is so fundamental for everything that we live in our life. And I always say, I'm a great leader because I played netball. I'm a great leader because I coached netball. It had such a big impact on my life.
Fantastic. You reminded me as well that in our household, my husband does the grocery shopping, which I am grateful for every single day. So as part of that, he needs to purchase the sanitary products. And he's done it for years and years and years, and no problem. But it was interesting. Just the other day, he said to me, "Oh, no, it is a bit embarrassing." And I said to him, if I was standing there in the aisle and saw a guy looking at the products there and purchasing them, I'd be so impressed. I would actually really be like, wow, that's pretty cool. It's just this stigma, right?
Absolutely. But again, for them, it's about how do we educate them to know what they need to know and to, stand in front of people and be proud that they can support you. What a
Yeah.
beautiful thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned, Rochelle, about the fear of leakage while playing sport, and that's a real fear. But one thing that we have seen, and I would love to see more of it, and I'm sure you would too, is particular clubs working with their uniform providers to change away from white shorts. Classic Sports and the Dragons and Gestalt did some incredible work there, leaning in to help those girls change their uniform there. What else would you like to see come out of this work that you're doing in the sports space?
Yeah. I love seeing that we're moving away from the white uniform piece, right? But I also love that the period undies are now coming in, dancing period undies and swimming period undies and all of that sort of thing. When I started Share the Dignity, there were only 2 period undie products on the market. Now I swear there are about 100. 41% of people who answered our bloody big survey said that they use period undies. It is a game changer. That would have changed my whole world when I was playing netball. So that is a good thing. But how do we get those sporting codes also to put period undies on the uniform list as a trigger for parents to think, oh, I could probably get that. That would take away one barrier from my daughter thinking that she's going to leak when she's playing netball as well, right? So, our big push is how do we make sure that they're on every uniform list and in any workplace and on sporting code lists and things like that. But one of my big dreams is to have, while we can get netball and all the girl code people to come on board because they understand passionately what menstruation means, I need to see more commitment from the men's sporting codes, right? I really want the NRL to really proudly, and ultimately it falls this year on State of Origin night, the World Menstrual Hygiene Day. How do we get men's sporting codes standing up and saying, you know what, women do deserve to have equality and equity in sport, right? And how do we, as men who don't have these issues, help negate the problems that are happening? So, I would love to see a bloody good sport with the NRL. I was at the football the other night. The Redcliffe Dolphins played Manly. I was just sitting there while people were screaming at so passionately about somebody missing a try or somebody going over the line and clapping and swearing like there was no tomorrow. And I was like, imagine if I just got to stand up there and scream that 64% of women can't play sport because of their period. What are we going to do? And add some expletives in there as well. Like, how can we make everybody be as passionate about menstrual equity or sporting equity as we are about someone getting knocked out or going over the try line or missing a try? That's what would be my ultimate goal, would be to have sporting, like the State of Origin is like the most watched sport in Australia, right? And a grand final. How could they step up to the plate and change the course and the direction for sport for women?
I love that. I love that so much. The passion coming out for sure. And those players likely will have daughters, right? And they will want to see their daughters
And
playing
women that
sport.
they love, right?
And the women that they love, their mums are there, their wives are there watching them. And Bells and I have had a little chat, I think, when we got off the call with you last, and I cheekily said, in games that you've just described, they'll always put up, the stats, right? The stats of what's going on, when did they have an injury last? I'd love to see where are they at on the cycle, right?
Yeah.
Because, that impacts how they're playing. Are they in their luteal phase? Are they feeling extra strong? Are they grumpy and they're going to tackle harder? Like that is the reality of the female players at that time. And so,
Absolutely.
I joke about that, but I think the more dialogue that we can have about this and being passionate and screaming it out, let's do it.
Let's do it. I don't know how many people will listen to us, but we'll try it anyway.
Okay, so we've spoken about the families and the coaches being more aware, but what is it that clubs can do to lean in and support their players as well on this front to make sure they've got maximum participation for female players?
Clubs are always looking at how to retain their girls. When they start to get to 14, they start to fall away from sports. So how can you make sure that just providing period products in your training bag, making sure your coaches are aware of the different cycles of a period and the knowledge that they need to have, but also work with your councils and making sure that you have sanitary bins in your training facilities and where you're playing. The amount of stories that we've heard about women having to roll up their pad in toilet paper and take it back home to dispose of it. Also, for the councils and the sporting organisations to understand that if you do not provide a sanitary bin, they're probably going down your toilet system, and that's what's costing you in your plumbing expenses all the time. So from an expenses perspective, from the clubs, you can order period products through Heart Sports now, so you're not having to go to the shops even if you don't want to. But really, $10 at Woolworths will buy you 2 packets of pads that you have in your bag. You don't have to supply every kind of different product as long as you've got something. People are not coming to play sports to get period products for free. They're coming to play sports, and if they have an accident or they need it, at least it's there. I can tell you back in the day when I used to play on gravel, they used to use pads on my knees to put across my knees when I'd gravel rashed the living daylights out of my knees and then wrap it up. So, but they were never there for me to use should I need them in my underwear, which is ironic, right? Because in every hospital in Australia, it's not guaranteed you can get a pad, but you can get your head sutured. I can get my meniscus fixed and I can get morphine, but it's not guaranteed I'll get a pad in a public hospital. Don't even start me on that one.
Wow.
But, but it was okay to use a pad on my knee, but it was to get a great big gravel rash sorted, but it was never okay just to give me a pad for my period.
That's
Weird,
crazy.
right?
Yeah, that is crazy. It is just like having a Band-Aid available or like whatever medical treatment that you need just to have on hand. It doesn't mean that you're going to need it every single time. It's the same thing. Like, why are we treating it differently? I think the opportunity I see is huge from a sponsorship perspective. Like, where are the sponsors leaning into this?
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, we at Share the Dignity have tried to make it as easy as possible because I know from being on the volunteer committee for a netball association to have separate invoices when you're purchasing things is complicated. So that's why we sort of just went with Heart Sport and said, if you're ordering your bibs and your balls and your training gears, you can just order period products that are simple. You don't have to think about it. And at the end of the day, you retain those goals and you ensure that they are less anxious about one less thing every month. And it's not just the girls who are playing. It's also the mums who've grabbed everything, but then she's grabbed the wrong bag and realized that she doesn't have tampons in a bag, right? And she's out at netball for 4 hours every Saturday, or going to a kid's footy game on a Sunday morning. Like, period products should just be available for the community of those that are playing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've all been there where it's come on suddenly and you didn't even think it was due. So the anxiety is always present when
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be. Just imagine that redirected energy where you don't even have to worry. I think you just perform in your day to day so much better.
Beginning of March, one of our volunteers contacted me and told me the story. Oh, I'll try not to cry.
Oh,
About how a woman in regional Victoria was asking for help for period products and she was using bread in her underwear to deal with her period. Could you imagine what your brain has got to go to think that bread is an alternative to be able to afford period products? And she was using bread because that was all that the food hamper place was giving her.
wow.
Imagine that.
Yeah, no.
So this was in March this year in
Wow.
Australia. So
Wow.
it's not like, I've heard stories over the years in remote communities where people are ripping mattress foam out of their old mattresses and putting it in their underwear to deal with their period. Imagine how undignified that must feel and how unhealthy that is for your mind and your body, as well as bread. Like, it never ceases to amaze me that people don't understand the enormity of the problem. What's happening with period poverty is that people just don't want to talk about it. And you think it's not happening to somebody our bloody big survey stats show you differently.
And like you say, it's not a once-off fix-it job. We've got it for a good chunk of our lives. I have often thought to myself, people in poverty situations, how are they dealing with this? And I think you've just exposed just some of it. And I'm sure there are other creatively devastating situations that women are having to go through. And that's not okay.
It's not okay.
I'm kind of
But
quite lost for words.
as I said, our voices are the most powerful thing that we have. And by sharing a story or sharing how you can make that not happen in your neck of the woods, that's the most important thing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. A guy I follow on social, beautiful human, he shared a story the other day of saying that he was down the aisle in the supermarket and noticed that a woman was trying to steal her sanitary products. And he said, let me get that for you. And he didn't have to, but it was a small gesture, and it just shows that, some kindness of anybody that you might come across goes a long way, because we don't want to see anybody in those circumstances.
Yeah. And you know what? She probably just looked like you and I. What I'm scared about right now is that the price of fuel, the price of food, the price of our electricity, our rents, our mortgages are going up. All of those things are going to go further than the 3 million people we were already helping and not able to help everybody, right? It hurts my heart. Like, it's extraordinary what women are going through to be able to feed their families or deal with life, right?
Yeah.
For one young girl that I met in my travels of International Women's Day, talked about the fact that for her, she either had to choose between buying her mental health medication or period products. And she was a tradie,
Yeah.
you know?
Not okay.
These are
No.
real concerns. How do we just make them readily available for all?
Are there other milestones to get to menstrual equity that you're seeing now?
Getting every sporting code on board is really important, but also making sure that the little clubs out at Roma, or making sure that Ruby can still play footy on a Saturday morning in Gladstone, or anywhere that they live. How do we get to those little clubs to make sure that they have an understanding that they're just as important as the people in the cities, right? But for me, if I look at the most important thing coming up, is that in 2027, we have our bloody big survey coming out again. What I'm after is 250,000 responses, and diverse responses. So not just everybody who lives in a capital city. I want to hear from our remote Indigenous communities, from our multicultural communities. I want to hear from the young, from the old, from everywhere in between, to be able to make sure we capture that diversity of circumstances for everybody so that we can make the change that is needed.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that diversity as well. And even I think the age is important, because I know we've spoken a lot about girls in sport, but on the other end of the spectrum, it could be the mums who are perimenopause, and what does that look like? And if she's not able to then care for herself, how does she then, pass that on to her children, and the whole ecosystem sort of breaks down. So if we get this right, if we can get this goal of yours, what is that going to really change? Like, how is that going to impact society and also girls in sport?
Yeah, look, I think we're looking to a world where periods won't be a barrier to you playing sport or living your best life, whether that's going to school, going to university, being at the shops and realizing that you've got your period and you can just go into the bathroom. It would it would create less anxiety for women. You've ever seen that analogy where men can just run that straight line, but women just have all of these hurdles to get to this in the same race. It's just taking away one of those hurdles. I know that there are lots of other hurdles, but this is one that we can actually fix in Australia.
Fantastic. And so, so empowering. How can people get involved in Share the Dignity and support you in the best way that they can?
Most important thing anyone can do to help share the dignity is to use your voice. Now that you've heard stories, you can't unhear them. When you know that by donating a packet of period products or taking the bloody good sport to your sporting code and saying, this is what we need to do, your voice is how we will all make menstrual equity happen in Australia.
And if clubs are wanting to bring bloody good sport into their environment, what's the path to do that?
Yeah. If you're a club and you want to find out more about Bloody Good Sport, head to our website, www.sharethedignity.org.au. Have a look at what Bloody Good Sport is asking of you and be in contact with us, because you will ensure that your retention of girls is higher than you've ever had before.
Amazing. And I'll be sure to put all the links in the show notes as well, so that people can access them easily. Now, we do have one closing question, which I ask all my guests, and it's, what does becoming MatchFit mean to you?
Fit to me is getting 8 hours sleep, getting my walk in the morning and seeing the sunrise and finding joy in my day. That's MatchFit for me.
Fantastic. I love it. You've got it down pat. And I think for me, hearing from you, your passion and the incredible work that you're doing, I think you are helping so many other women becoming match fit in their day, or at least being on that journey towards betterment and equity, which I can't thank you enough for.
Thank you.
It's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast today, Rochelle. I really do appreciate it. Anything that we can do to help, please reach out, as I'm sure all our listeners will be keen to jump on board as well.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening to Becoming MatchFit. If today's conversation inspired you, feel free to share it with a teammate or someone you love as well. You can access free tools, resources, and our community in MatchFit 360 Academy. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, unlock your value, change your game, and become MatchFit.